Imagine this, you're driving up to your peaceful lake cabin, the one place in the world that feels like an escape from all the noise and stress of everyday life. The sun is shining through the trees, you can hear the faint sound of birds calling in the distance, and all you can think about is the smell of the pine trees, the sound of the lake lapping against the shore, and the feeling of sitting on your old wooden porch with a cold drink in your hand. For me, that cabin wasn't just a building. It was family history. My grandfather built it himself with his own hands decades ago. Every summer since I was a kid, I spent time there fishing with my dad, roasting marshmallows with my siblings, and listening to my mom tell stories around the fire. It was more than wood and nails, it was memories, laughter, and the kind of tradition you can't put a price on. So when I pulled up that afternoon, expecting to see the little brown cabin with its green shutters and rocking chair on the porch, what I saw instead made my stomach flip. The cabin was gone. Completely gone. Where it used to stand, there was nothing but broken boards, shattered glass, and piles of rubble like it had been bulldozed down by a wrecking crew. The chimney lay sideways on the ground like some forgotten relic, the porch swing was snapped in half, and all that remained standing was the old wooden post at the edge of the driveway where we used to hang a lantern at night. I froze in the car, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight that my knuckles went white. My first thought was that maybe there had been some freak accident, a fire, a tornado, something natural that destroyed it while I was away. But then my eyes caught a flash of white paper taped to that post, flapping slightly in the wind. I stepped out of the car slowly, my heart pounding, and walked toward it. In big, bold black letters, the notice said, "This structure was demolished due to unpaid HOA fees. Signed, Lakeview HOA." My mouth literally dropped open. I read it 3 times over because I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My cabin, my family's cabin, demolished not because of a storm, not because of some emergency, but because the Homeowners Association claimed I didn't pay their fees. I felt a rush of anger shoot through me. First of all, I had paid every single HOA fee on time. I had the receipts saved in my email, plus hard copies back home in my office. Second, even if I hadn't paid, how could an HOA possibly think it had the authority to bulldoze someone's entire home? That wasn't a fine or a lien or a penalty, that was destruction of property. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone and dialed the number at the bottom of the notice. After a few rings, a woman answered with a voice so smug it made me grit my teeth. "Lakeview Homeowners Association, this is Linda, how may I help you?" I barely contained my anger. I said, "Yes, this is Ryan. I'm the owner of the cabin at Lot 43. I just arrived and my home has been demolished. What the hell is going on?" There was a pause, then her voice, dripping with arrogance, replied, "Oh, Mr. Ryan. Yes, we've been trying to reach you for months. You failed to pay your HOA fees, and as a result, the board authorized the removal of your structure." I nearly dropped the phone. Removal of my structure? That was my home. And I did pay my fees. Every single one of them. She gave this little laugh, the kind of laugh that makes your blood boil, and said, "Well, according to our records, you didn't. Maybe you thought living out of town meant you could ignore your responsibilities. But we follow the rules here. If you have a problem, you can take it up with the board." And then, she hung up. Just like that. No sympathy, no explanation, just an arrogant dismissal as if she had every right in the world to do this. I stood there, staring at the rubble, my phone still in my hand, my pulse racing. I could feel my face getting hot with anger. All the weekends spent here, all the holidays, the laughter, the fishing trips with my dad, the fireflies my mom used to point out to us kids at night, it was all flattened like it meant nothing. I could practically see the bulldozer tracks in the dirt, ripping apart decades of memories in a matter of hours. At that moment, something in me snapped. They thought I was just some regular homeowner they could push around, intimidate, and silence. What they didn't know, what they had absolutely no idea about, was that my entire family worked in federal law enforcement. My dad was with the FBI, my mom worked for Homeland Security, my sister was with the ATF, my brother worked cybercrime for the Secret Service, and I myself was a deputy U.S. Marshal. Law enforcement ran through our bloodline. We were raised to respect the law, to defend it, and to make sure justice was served. And this? This was beyond wrong. This was fraud, abuse of power, and outright destruction of property. I looked around the property again, and the anger I felt turned into determination. They thought they could scare me into silence, but they just picked the wrong family to mess with. I wasn't going to let this go. Not for me, not for my family, and not for the legacy of the man who built this cabin with his bare hands. The HOA had crossed a line, and they were about to find out that they weren't the ones holding the power anymore. The first thing I did after that phone call was dial my dad. He picked up on the second ring, and the moment he heard the edge in my voice, he knew something was wrong. "Dad," I said, trying to keep my voice steady but failing, "the cabin, it's gone. The HOA demolished it." For a long moment there was silence, and then he said in a low, controlled tone, "Stay put. We're coming." Within hours, my parents, my siblings, and even my uncle had driven out to the lake. We all stood around the wreckage in disbelief, the same way you would after a house fire. Nobody said much at first. My dad kept pacing, his jaw tight, his fists clenched at his sides. My mom, calm but with that fire in her eyes I'd seen 100 times before, bent down to pick up a piece of wood that had once been part of the porch railing. My sister pulled out her phone and started taking photos from every angle, and my brother, who always had a laptop with him, sat on the hood of his car and began pulling up the HOA bylaws right there on the spot. We weren't just going to cry about it, we were going to fight back. We started with the basics. I pulled up my bank records and email receipts and showed them to everyone. "Look," I said, pointing to the screen, "I paid every fee, every quarter. They cashed the checks. There's no way they can say I was behind." My mom nodded, already scrolling through county property laws on her phone. My sister muttered, "If they falsified documents, that's fraud. And if they used them to authorize a demolition? That's criminal." My brother had already hacked his way into the HOA's online payment portal, cross-checking my payments with their supposed records. "This is garbage," he said, shaking his head. "They doctored the database. It looks like they deleted your transactions. Somebody on the inside did this deliberately." It all pointed to one name, Linda, the HOA president. She'd been in power for years, notorious for her overreach and the way she bullied residents into following her every whim. She'd fine people for having a flower bed that didn't match community standards, for painting their sheds the wrong shade of beige, even for leaving out Christmas decorations too long. People hated her, but nobody dared stand up to her because she wielded the HOA like a weapon. And now, apparently, she had taken things even further by demolishing my cabin under the pretense of unpaid fees. But here's where it got interesting. When we checked the demolition company records, we discovered the company that tore down my cabin wasn't some random contractor. It was owned by Linda's cousin. That meant not only was this demolition illegal, but it was also a way for her to funnel money directly to her family. The more we dug, the dirtier it got. Neighbors started showing up while we were working. One older man said, "I saw them bring in the bulldozer last week. Thought it was strange, but figured you'd given permission." Another neighbor, a woman who lived across the road, pulled out her security camera footage and handed it to me. The video showed the demolition crew rolling up, tearing down the cabin, and even laughing as they did it. That was evidence we couldn't ignore. We gathered everything: video footage, emails, receipts, bank records, the fraudulent county paperwork Linda had filed, and the HOA's own bylaws. Piece by piece, we built a mountain of evidence that proved this wasn't just a mistake, it was a conspiracy. The more evidence we piled up, the angrier my dad got. He finally said, "Enough. We're taking this federal." He picked up the phone and called one of his contacts at the FBI. When you've spent your career in law enforcement, you know people, and he knew exactly who to call. Within 2 days, agents were looking into the HOA. They weren't just investigating my case, they were looking at the entire history of the Lakeview HOA. And sure enough, they found a pattern. Other families, especially those who lived out of state and didn't visit their cabins often, had also mysteriously failed to pay fees. Their properties had been seized, fined into oblivion, or even sold off at community auctions that just happened to benefit board members. My cabin wasn't the first, it was just the boldest move yet. Meanwhile, Linda didn't back down. She doubled down. She sent me a new notice in the mail claiming I now owed late fees, demolition costs, and penalties for failure to comply with HOA directives. Can you believe that? She demolished my home and then billed me for it. The arrogance was off the charts. She even threatened in writing to put a lien on the land itself and claimed the HOA now had first rights to purchase it because it no longer contained a valid dwelling. Reading that letter, I realized Linda wasn't just drunk on power, she truly believed she was untouchable. But the thing is, when you go up against a family like mine, you're not dealing with scared homeowners who don't know their rights. You're dealing with trained investigators, federal agents, people who have spent their lives studying fraud, corruption, and abuse of power. Every arrogant step Linda took only added more fuel to the fire we were building against her. I spent nights at my parents' house, barely sleeping, going over files with my siblings. My brother traced bank transactions linking HOA funds directly into Linda's personal accounts. My sister found cases in state court where homeowners had tried to sue the HOA but mysteriously dropped the lawsuits, likely pressured into silence. My mom, with her Homeland Security expertise, cross-referenced the demolition company's permits and found that half of them were expired or falsified. It was like peeling an onion, every layer revealed something worse underneath. What shocked me most was how brazen they were. It was almost like they had done it for so long they thought nobody would ever question them. And maybe most people wouldn't. Most people don't have the resources, the knowledge, or the connections to take down an HOA, especially one run by someone as manipulative as Linda. But we weren't most people. We were the wrong family to mess with. And Linda had no idea what storm she had just brought down on herself. The investigation kept building, and I'll never forget the moment one of my dad's FBI friends called him and said, "We've got enough." That was the turning point. It wasn't just about my cabin anymore. It was about every homeowner Linda had cheated, every lie she had told, every dollar she had stolen. And now, justice was on its way. The day justice finally caught up with Linda and her HOA board is etched in my memory forever. It started like any other morning at their fancy little HOA office, a glass-walled building that looked far too important for what it actually was. The board members, including Linda, were sitting around a polished table sipping their overpriced coffee, probably patting themselves on the back for keeping the neighborhood in order. What they didn't know was that this was the day their empire of lies came crashing down. Around 10 in the morning, a line of black SUVs rolled up outside the office. Out stepped a team of federal agents, badges shining in the sunlight, armed with warrants. The look on the receptionist's face was priceless, eyes wide, jaw dropping, when the lead agent walked past her and straight into the boardroom. Linda was in mid-sentence, lecturing another homeowner about lawn violations, when the agent slammed a folder of documents onto the table and said, "This meeting is over. You're under investigation." For the first time since I'd known her, Linda's smug smile disappeared. She stammered something about this being a misunderstanding, but when the agents pulled out arrest warrants with her name printed clearly at the top, her face went pale as paper. "This is illegal," she cried, pointing her finger like a child caught stealing candy. But the truth was right there in black and white: fraud, falsification of documents, conspiracy, and destruction of private property. My dad, standing off to the side with a look of cold satisfaction, didn't have to say a word. Just his presence made it clear that the jig was up. The board members were handcuffed one by one, their protests echoing through the office like the last gasps of a dying machine. One of them tried to claim he didn't know about the demolition, but the evidence said otherwise. The bank records my brother dug up, the security footage from the neighbor, the falsified HOA databases, all of it painted a picture that couldn't be denied. And when the demolition company's connection to Linda's cousin came out, the agents shook their heads in disbelief. It was corruption laid bare, and now the people who had tormented this community for years were finally being dragged out into the light. But the story didn't end with the arrests. That was just the beginning. My attorney, armed with the mountain of evidence my family had gathered, filed a massive lawsuit not only against the HOA but also against Linda personally. The charges ranged from fraud to willful destruction of property, and because my cabin was a family legacy built by my grandfather, the emotional damages were immense. The courtroom battle was intense. Linda tried every trick in the book. Her lawyers claimed the HOA bylaws gave her authority, that I had been delinquent in payments, that the demolition was necessary. But every lie she told was met with hard evidence. When my brother took the stand and walked the jury through the manipulated HOA database, jaws dropped. When the neighbor's security footage was played on the big screen, showing the bulldozer tearing into my cabin, the jury looked horrified. And when my mom testified about the emotional value of the property, about the generations of family memories tied to that cabin, even the judge seemed moved. The verdict came down harder than any of us expected. Not only were Linda and the board found guilty, but the court also awarded me triple damages under state law for willful property destruction. That meant they had to rebuild my cabin from the ground up and pay me a massive settlement for the emotional toll. On top of that, the federal charges meant Linda was facing real prison time. Fraud, conspiracy, falsification of documents, those aren't just civil matters. Those are crimes. And when sentencing day came, she stood there in front of the judge, no longer smug, no longer arrogant, just a broken woman hearing that she'd be spending years behind bars. The rest of the board members weren't spared either. Some cut deals, but all of them walked away disgraced, fined, or facing jail time. And the demolition company? Shut down for good. Investigators found years of shady practices, expired permits, and fraudulent paperwork. Linda's cousin lost everything, his equipment seized, his business license revoked. The ripple effect spread through the whole corrupt little empire they had built, tearing it down piece by piece just like they had torn down my cabin. But this time, it wasn't innocent property being destroyed. It was greed, arrogance, and corruption being dismantled. The best part of it all came months later, when the new cabin was finally complete. It stood in the same spot as the old one, but bigger, stronger, and more beautiful than ever. We built it with wide porches, big windows overlooking the lake, and a fire pit in the back for summer nights. And this time, every nail, every beam, every stone carried with it a sense of victory. My family and I stood together on the porch, looking out at the lake as the sun set, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, peace. The cabin wasn't just restored. Justice had been restored too. And as for Linda? The irony of it all still makes me laugh. Because after the lawsuits, the fines, and the legal fees, she lost her own home. Her property, which was ironically under the same HOA rules she once wielded like a weapon, was foreclosed on. The woman who thought she could control everyone else lost everything she had. I heard later she ended up moving into a tiny apartment miles away, far from the lake, far from the power she once abused. It was poetic justice. Sitting on that porch now, I think about how quickly things escalated. One day I was driving up to my cabin for a weekend of peace, and the next I was standing in rubble, staring at a piece of paper that said my home was gone. But I also think about how important it was that I didn't back down. The HOA counted on fear, on intimidation, on people not knowing their rights. They thought homeowners would just pay up or walk away. But when you fight back, when you gather evidence, when you refuse to be bullied, the truth wins. And in my case, the truth came with federal badges and courtroom victories. So if there's one lesson to take from my story, it's this: never underestimate the power of standing up for yourself. Never assume the people in power are untouchable. And never let an HOA, or anyone, destroy what's rightfully yours. My family and I fought back, and we won. And now, every time I sit on that porch, every time I hear the water lapping against the shore or the sound of fire crackling at night, I smile. Because this cabin isn't just a place to relax. It's proof that no matter how powerful someone thinks they are, justice will always catch up to them.